Why do so many people, I hear this a lot, why do so many people feel tired even after a full night of sleep? And what are some hidden factors that could be affecting their sleep quality?
So one of the things that's kind of tough in my business is tell the difference between sleep disorders and what I call disordered sleep, right? So sleep disorders, apnea, narcolepsy, periodic limb movements, insomnia. Those are some of the reasons why you could get the right amount of sleep, but your quality could be completely off because you've got undiagnosed sleep apnea, let's say, or you've got narcolepsy or something like that. But then there's this whole other realm of really weird shit that happens for people in their sleep, which I call disordered sleep, right? So I go back into that room in the back of the house, I turn off the lights, I come out 6-7 hours later and I feel like crap. Like, what's going on, Michael? So part of that, I think, has to do with the idea of what is the difference between sleepiness and fatigue, right? So fatigue is a whole different kind of animal, right? You've talked about this with a lot of your experts, people who deal with Parkinson's, who deal with Alzheimer's. Fatigue is a whole kind of animal unto itself. So let's say it's not fatigue, because there's some ways that we can measure that. What else could it be? I'm really looking at sleep quality at that point in time. And a lot of people don't mean to mess up their sleep, but they do it all the time, right? So classic example is I'm sitting down with a patient for the first time and they say, okay, Dr. Breus, I'm excited to work with you. I'm sleeping like dog shit. I really need some help. But by the way, I can't give up my wine. Right? And it's like I'm in this negotiating and I'm like, by the way, alcohol in any form really messes up your sleep. And they said, well, how about white wine?
Yeah.
I'm like,
negotiating.
Right. I'm like, come on, like, do we want to do this or not? So I think there's a lot of things that people don't even realize that they're doing that they just don't think about. And then there's this one other one that's kind of sneaky, which is just like, life is really fucking stressful. Maybe it's that, right? It's like, I got 4 kids, I'm trying to pay my rent, my mortgage, my car, what have you. And I'm so overtaxed and I don't really know how to handle my stress that now I'm feeling this level of tiredness during the day.
So there are 2 primary variables, or maybe there are more, I don't know, but it seems that there's sleep duration and then there's sleep quality, which you've referenced.
Absolutely. And so a lot of people, like when they look at trackers or things like that, they're always like, hey, Dr. Breus, I'm getting my 8 hours. Let's be clear. 8 hours is a fucking myth, okay? Like there's no reason why people have to be striving for 8 hours. Everybody's different. And everybody's amount is different. And here's something that's really interesting. And people might remember from the last time you interviewed me, because we were talking about my book then, The Power of When. But if you sleep within your chronotype, your quality goes straight up and you actually need less sleep. It's kind of crazy. I did it on myself to kind of test it out. I started going to bed. I'm a night owl kind of person, so I call myself a wolf. And I started going to bed at midnight for like 3 months. And I used to wake up around 7:30 and then it was 7:15 and then it was 6:45. Now my body won't let me sleep longer than about 6 hours and maybe 15 minutes. I'm 56 years old. I'm the sleep doctor and I'm only sleeping 6 hours and 15 minutes because the quality is so good, right? So I check my quality. I make sure I wake up, I feel good. I think a lot of people don't realize that. Like, it's okay if you're getting less sleep as long as you feel okay. But in the question you asked previously, you weren't feeling okay. So that becomes kind of the highlight.
Interesting. Do your needs, the duration that a person needs.
Yes.
Does that change as we age?
It does. So when you look at itty bitty babies, they need a lot of fucking sleep, right? When you go to adults, we need less and less and less. Other thing that happens is the quality of our sleep changes as we age. So believe it or not, as a baby, you only have 2 stages of sleep. There's a REM sleep and there's this other sleep that kind of keeps all 4 combined. Then as you move through these developmental stages, you start to get different kind of sort of a differentiation about your sleep. And that's actually pretty cool. Then you kind of cross this line and end up in my realm at 55, 56 years old, where the sleep quality actually goes down. And one thing I think it's important for all of the listeners and watchers to think about is if you're using a tracker, I'm pretty sure there's no tracker out there that takes into account the scoring differences that we use in the sleep laboratories, right? So when you hit a certain age in the sleep lab, we actually score your sleep differently because your brain waves are different. I'm pretty sure there isn't a tracker out there that shows something like that. So I think people are also getting a lot of misinformation. Like they wake up and they're like, I feel great. And it says it's got 47. That sucks.
Yeah. One thing that we got to hang out recently at Eudaimonia in Florida, and you said that one of your most viral videos tackles the question of what happens if I wake up in the middle of the night.
Yes.
If I wake up in the middle of the night, How do I get back to bed?
Right. So it's the second most popular question that I get asked. Number one is, what bed should I buy? I'm not really sure why I get asked that question so much. So I've had to learn a lot about beds. I actually know a shitload about beds.
Okay, I want to go into that.
We can talk soon. But this is a question that's going to take me a minute or two to set it up. But I want everybody out there to understand the biology of it. And also, just to be fair, we talk about it in the book, Sleep, Drink, Breathe, because this is one of the cardinal things that people have a problem with. And that's kind of what we're trying to solve in the book. So here's what's interesting is when you're falling asleep, your core body temperature rises, and it hits a peak. Then that peak, it begins to fall. When it falls, that's a signal to your brain to release melatonin, which is kind of the key that starts the engine for sleep. However, your core body temperature continues to drop. By the way, this is the reason why we tell people to sleep in the cool, because if you're sleeping in the hot, then your core body temperature can't go down, which isn't good. At some point in time, your core body temperature has got to heat you up. Otherwise, you go hypothermic and you die. Not good, right? And so when your core body temperature turns up, you immediately wake up. To be clear, every single person on earth wakes up between about 1 and about 3 o'clock in the morning. 99% of those people roll over, fall right back to sleep, and aren't actually even awake longer than maybe 30 seconds. Believe it or not, it takes almost 45 seconds to a minute for you to recognize that you're awake, unless it's an emergent kind of situation. So they wake up. Now they have a problem, right? So what do? You've now woken up. So my very first piece of advice to people is don't go pee. Now you might be thinking in your head, I can't believe Michael just said this, but I'm curious as to why. So here's what ends up happening is most people, they lie there and they're like, I'm up, I might as well go pee, right? Here's why that's not the best idea. So there's one metric that most people don't know is you want to have a heart rate of 60 or below to enter into a state of unconsciousness. So guess what happens when to your heart rate when you go from lying to seated to standing, you walk across the room.
Heart rate goes up.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Now, when you come back, you got two problems. You got to get your heart rate down and then you got to be able to get yourself back to sleep, right? So don't pee. Now, I want to be clear. If you got to pee, go pee. Right. Okay. Like, let's be fair. Like, I'm not trailing. Like, if it's painful, please do me a favor. Go pee. But if you're just sitting there saying to yourself, well, maybe, don't. Okay. Number 2, don't look at the clock. Okay. Now, let's be fair. Everybody looks at the clock. Then you instantly do the mental math. And now you're pissed, right? It's 3 o'clock. I've got to be up at 6:30. Sleep. And you try to force yourself to sleep. Okay. So number 1, your energy is going in the complete opposite direction of where you want it to be, right? When you're telling yourself to sleep, your anxiety is high, you're angry, and that heart rate straight up in the air. So we've got to figure out a way in the middle of the night for you to not get monkey mind, meaning you're going to start thinking about your new business, you're going to be thinking about your problems, you're going to be thinking about something, and we got to get your heart rate back down, right? So we have to have a technique that will do both of these things at once. Turns out there is one. It's called 4-7-8 breathing, right? So developed by Dr. Andrew Weil for the Navy SEALs, kind of cool. He developed it for snipers. So what he would do, if you're a long range sniper and you're shooting all the way down range, I almost knocked the shit out of that. What'll happen is if your heart's beating too fast, you can change the trajectory of the bullet. So they taught them to slow their heart rate down. It takes the sniper approximately 1 second to fire. It takes all of us about 2 or 3, but they're very quick at it. And so he did it so they could fire in between heartbeats.
Wow, that's crazy.
It's kind of cool, right?
So interesting, yeah.
And it brought it down to 60 or below. That's our magic number. And here's another thing. Guess what? You can't think of anything else when you're counting. So it's exactly what it sounds like. And we go through it in the book. You slowly breathe in for a count of 4. You hold for a count of 7. You breathe out for a count of 8. 10 to 12 cycles of this, your heart rate dumps. And all of a sudden, you're there. Plus, you've been counting this whole time, so you can't think about anything else that's going on. And that's when the natural sleep process has a great opportunity to kick back in because you're setting all the standards up for it, right? You're not thinking about stuff that's making you angry. You're lowering your heart rate. You kind of get into the breath, and all of a sudden you're there. And then you just drift off to sleep. Now, I would be stupid to think that that was going to solve the problem for every single person on earth, but it does do a pretty damn good job. A couple of other things that people want to think about is, okay, I've tried his breathing. I didn't go pee. I didn't even look at the clock, but I'm still up. What do I do now? So there is a practice called Yoga Nidra, and it's been labeled in science as non-sleep deep rest, which I'm okay with either one of those. And all it is you're lying there in the dark, in the quiet. It turns out it's rejuvenative. It's not as good as sleep. I'd say about an hour of that is probably worth about 20 minutes of sleep. So another thing for folks to remember is if you're just hanging out in the middle of the night, lying there relaxing, it's actually helpful for you. Again, you're giving yourself the opportunity for the natural sleep process to kind of kick into gear and allow you to fall back asleep. Let's say that that doesn't happen. You're still there. It's 45 minutes, hour later, you've done your breathing. Here's where acceptance actually has to come into play. And what I mean by acceptance is your head's not going to pop off, right? This has happened to you like dozens and dozens of times. But in the middle of the night, our brains aren't thinking clearly and we tell ourselves all this crazy shit, right? Like, I'm going to get fired tomorrow because I'm going to sleep through my alarm, or I'm going to miss my plane, or something along those lines, which, by the way, never happens, right? So we really have to kind of think to ourselves, hey, maybe there's something going on with my body. My body needs to be up at this particular time. I'm not able to fall back asleep. I've done all these techniques and I've been here for an hour. It's probably okay to go ahead and get up and start my day, right? Then here's where the biggest problem comes in is what a lot of people do is, let's say they got up and they couldn't fall back asleep and they get out of bed like 4:30 in the morning. Then they'll go to bed early. Cardinal sin. Don't go to bed early because your circadian rhythm isn't used to it. And it's not going to want you to fall asleep. Go to bed at your normal bedtime, even though it's going to feel really hard to get there, and you'll fall right asleep and you'll keep going. I've only had 3 patients ever have 3 nights in a row where it was that bad. And usually if you can manipulate the system by keeping somebody awake. Obviously, they're not going to be drinking a lot of caffeine during this period of time because that kind of counteracts all the stuff we're trying to do. But we can usually get them there pretty quick.
How should one utilize caffeine if they wake up and they're still feeling sleepy?
So if you wake up and you're still feeling sleepy, I don't think I have a problem with caffeine. I don't have a problem with nicotine. Like, there are stimulants out there that when used appropriately, I don't think there's a big deal to them. It's just when you move too far past that or you're finding yourself a level of dependence on these things. Caffeine is a tough one because, quite honestly, you drink it, you feel a little bit of juice from it, and then you don't feel anything from it, but it's still in your system for 6 to 8 hours as a half-life. So that's where it gets problematic for people when they're trying to fall asleep, especially people who already have insomnia, because a lot of them have got a good bit of anxiety with it. I would argue, Max, that in my practice over the years, 75% of my insomniacs have got a significant amount of anxiety. Like, that's what we're treating for the most part. And it's helpful and it works. But at the end of the day, these are some anxious people, and we've got to figure out better ways to settle them down.
Are there any natural supplements perhaps that might help turn down the dial on anxiety?
Absolutely. So one of the first things, though, I try to do with all my patients when they come to me for supplementation is I say, hold on a second, let's do some blood work. My very first question is, what are you deficient in? I'm pretty sure you're not deficient in ashwagandha, but you might be deficient in vitamin D, magnesium, melatonin. There's a couple of things, iron. That's when I want you to do a blood test first, and let's get everything up to par levels and see how this unit works when everything's in it and running. If you're still not sleeping, then I definitely have recommendations, but it's going to depend more on your symptomatology. So if you turn to me and say, hey, Michael, I'm doing all this stuff, I don't have any deficiencies, I'm going to bed when you told me to, but I'm having a hard time settling down, then you might want to look at a valerian, because valerian is probably the most well-studied. And if you actually have it with hops, that preparation seems to actually work pretty well in most cases. So that might be something, versus you might turn to me and say, you know what, I'm sleepy, but I'm sleepy at the wrong times. Melatonin is probably what we would look for there. I also want to be thoughtful here because a lot of people are wondering, like, why hasn't he mentioned melatonin yet? That's like the big sleep hormone, okay? So let's be super duper clear. Melatonin is the most overused supplement in history. It's not what we think it is, okay? Melatonin's a hormone, number one, and it got under the FDA regulation, so it's not being regulated. So you actually can't get melatonin in most countries. Yeah, like if you go to Australia, they're going to be like, Max, you need a prescription for that.
I didn't realize
Most of Europe, you need a prescription for it. So that's number one. Number two, at high dosages, it's birth control. It's actually a contraceptive. Yeah. Right? And so here's the problem is when a pediatrician tells a mom or a dad to give their kid melatonin, right? Like, I can't think of anything worse for a young female developing body than adding a contraceptive when it's not necessary, right? Like that doesn't make sense to me. Now, melatonin is an incredible antioxidant, and there are a lot of people who have used it in other types of situations outside of sleep, which I find pretty fascinating. An example of that is long COVID, right? So there's people out there who are getting tremendous dosages, like 20, 30, 50 milligrams, 100 milligrams of melatonin during long COVID. And what they're finding is it's an amazing antioxidant, but wow, these people feel like dog shit on that much melatonin. You know you've hit way too much melatonin when you're getting really funky dreams, super duper vivid ones. Also, another problem with melatonin, why I don't like people to just kind of go out and take it on their own. People don't know this, but it affects birth control. It affects antidepressant medication. It affects diabetes medication, and it affects heart medication. So, because it's a circadian pacemaker, right? And so all of those things have to be in your system at a particular time. That's why we have people take drugs at the same time every day. So that much is in their system so that the medication is working appropriately. And, you know, to be fair, you know me, I'm not a pro-drug guy at all. But at the end of the day, if you take something like melatonin, it's going to play around with everything else that you're taking.
Well, in what context would melatonin as a supplement then be helpful?
Jet lag, shift work, something called REM behavior disorder. This is a really interesting situation where people act out their dreams, like full on. It's crazy, but very interesting. There's a new study out looking at ADD and ADHD where we've seen that melatonin can actually be helpful there. And in people with a melatonin deficiency who have insomnia. I would say those are the 5 big cases where I think it would make a lot of sense. So what we're looking for is if there's a circadian disruption, like in jet lag or in shift work, right? You're forcing somebody to work at night or you're traveling a million miles away. That's where it really has a tendency to work itself out well.
And is there an appropriate, what is the appropriate dose?
So this is an interesting story. So this doctor out of MIT, Dr. Workman, is the person who did all the studies and figured out that you need between 1/3 and 1.5 milligrams of melatonin to reach plasma concentration levels. And then he patented the dose. And
interesting. Is that why you can't find that
exactly
low of a dose typically?
That's because nobody wants to pay his patent fee or whatever it's called, licensing fee. So people just said, because it's not regulated, fuck it, let's just double it,
How do you
triple
do that?
it. They just doubled it and they just made it.
How do you patent a dose though?
I don't know. It was back in the day. I mean, it's a really interesting story, but he was able to do it, and now everybody else does it differently.
Wow. Yeah. Typically, you see 3 milligrams. That's like
right, which is
dose.
probably double what a normal adult yours or my size would need.
Wow.
And if you're crazy enough to give it to kids, which I don't recommend, you wouldn't want anywhere near that dose.
Wow. Very.
Now, but there is one kid population where we actually do see it important, and it works, is in the autism spectrum. Kids on the spectrum and kids full on autism, absolutely it works well in those kids at higher dosages, like 3, 4, 5 milligrams a night.
Interesting. So melatonin can work in that population, children with autism, as a sleep aid.
Yeah, it's
particularly
particularly well for that group of kids.
Wow.
Yeah, it's interesting. Now, if there are any parents out there who are like, oh, fantastic, like, number one, check with your doctor, because if your child's on other medications, remember, this is a supplement that can change the effectiveness of other medications. So we just want to be thoughtful.
Very interesting. Wow. This is why I love having you in, because you're like a walking encyclopedia. Is there an ideal room temperature to encourage optimal sleep?
There is. So what we think is somewhere between like 65 and like 70 degrees seems to be what we're kind of shooting for. We don't want it to be too cold, because if you shiver, it'll wake you up. Right? And we don't want it to be too warm, obviously, because then your core body temperature isn't dropping at the rate that we wanted. So 65 to 70. But look, I used to live in Scottsdale, Arizona. There was no universe I could cool my house down to 70 degrees, right? It was just too hot. So then you're looking at maybe 25 degrees off the daily high when you're in a like really hot environment. But obviously, cooler is better. One of my favorite hacks that I teach people is you get a water bottle, like a plastic water bottle, 2 of them, you stick them in the freezer. And when they freeze, you stick them into some tube socks, and then you put them on either side of your hips. It's like having your own little mini air conditioner at night. It works like a charm. You don't have to pay $4,000 for all of those other gadgets.
Cooling mattress, etc.
I like a lot of the cooling mattresses, but to be honest with you, I would try this technique first and see if it's helpful, because unfortunately, a lot of those are pretty expensive.
Okay, wait. Walk me through this technique. You freeze 2 plastic water
just freeze
bottles.
2 water bottles and you just put them in a tube sock, just so that, because the condensation would make your mattress and your stuff wet. I just wanted to do that, and you just literally lay them on the outside of your hips.
Wow. And
You'll be shocked at how well it works.
Wow, that's so exciting. That's so cool.
Yeah.
Because I have one of these cooling mattresses and I can't sleep well without it because I wake up sweaty. which is a problem that's fixed for me.
So when you travel, you're not going to take your cooling mattress with you. Here's what you do is you call ahead, or you grab 3 bottles of water and you stuff them in the freezer. And then when you come back, and you're in.
Wow. That's such good advice.
Super sleeper hack.
And it makes sense. It makes sense that a cooler room temperature would be optimal for sleep, because if you think about it, when night falls, the earth cools off.
Exactly.
So from an evolutionary standpoint, I mean, we live in the era of chronic climate control,
yes.
right? And so our homes have become like Vegas in the sense that,
it's awful.
I mean, we have windows, we can see what time of day it is, but we can't necessarily feel what time of day it is.
Right. And by the way, talking of Vegas, like, they do a pretty good job of making sure you have no idea what's going on outside, right? On purpose, because they control all of it. They want all of that done. I mean, a thing that we actually go through in the book is air quality, right? Because sleep, drink, breathe, right? So we're talking about breathing. What is the quality of and people don't think about this, but like, what's the room that you breathe in the most?
Your bedroom.
It's your bedroom, right? Because that's the room you spend the most time in. So now we want to get people to think, oh, well, maybe I should have an air filter in there. Doesn't have to be expensive. Doesn't have to be some $3,000 job. Go on Amazon for $30. You can have one that fits in your room and has a nice kind of fan to it. So it's got a nice little noise to it. And you know what? It helps. Like, it makes a difference. It's just like filtering your water. Like, we talk about it in the book. Like, a lot of people don't realize it, but there's actually websites where you can put your zip code in and it'll tell you what's in your tap water. Dude, it's scary what's in the tap water in LA.
Oh, I'm sure.
And so I'm telling people, like, at very least, and now, but you also have the other problem, which is the microplastics in all the other stuff. So people are like, what do I do? What do I do? So I'm telling people to buy pitchers, like Brita pitchers, put in the filter, and then filter your water and drink it that way out of a glass or steel.
Very smart. Yeah, water is, we've had a number of, we've had a toxicologist on the show recently, and the top source of xenobiotic toxic exposures that your average human today is exposed to is by way of tap water.
It's awful, right? It's unbelievable. And people don't even think about it. Also, people really don't understand how to hydrate themselves. That was one of the things that I learned in the book. People are like, Michael, why did you write a book about sleeping, about hydrating, and about breathing? And I was like, wellness is too fucking complicated at this point, right? Like, people are coming up to me like, do I have a sauna? Do I need a green drink? Like, what do I do? I'm like, you need to sleep, you need to hydrate, and you need to breathe. Like, get those 3 things down first. You will be shocked at how much better your whole system does. Like, all the stuff that you talk about, if every one of your folks did these 3 things, every single thing that you talk about gets better. Right?
I love that. There was a study that came out recently that I thought was really interesting, because I hadn't heard this previously, but that it found that when a room is well ventilated, sleep quality actually goes up.
It does. That has to do with the air quality that we were just mentioning. But there was a study out of NASA, and they actually even looked at humidity. And it turns out that a little bit of humidity is a good thing. So about 40% humidity. What happens is, and we can also talk about this from a mouth breathing, nose breathing standpoint, because a lot of people ask me about mouth tape, right? And it's like, Michael, should I tape my mouth? I'm like, well, I don't know. Let's talk about it, right? And so when we think about air, right, we only want to breathe through our nose. We don't want to breathe through our mouth, because otherwise it's kind of like putting like leaded gas in the car. Like, there's no filter, right? And so all the bacteria, all the virus goes straight into the gut. And while the gut is pretty good at handling a lot of those things, it's not the best idea. Where if you're breathing through your nose, you got the cilia, you've got the turbinates that make everything warmer. Like, the oxygen comes in, it's cleaner, it's pure. So it makes a lot of sense that you would want to have moving air in a bedroom on a fairly regular basis, because you're going to hopefully get a lot of those pathogens out of there.
Yeah, I now sleep with my window open.
Yeah. Well, and it's a good time of year to do it, right? Like, as it's getting cooler, it's perfect, because then you can kind of use nature's outside air conditioning, if you will, and it kind of cools your whole room down.
What are some other factors that negatively affect sleep quality? You mentioned alcohol. That's a big one. But what about, I mean, today I call them our smartphones, the bad news flashlight. We're all perennially glued to our phones these days. And that occurs, from the moment we wake up for many of us, myself included, to moments, just mere moments before we go to sleep. Is that negatively affecting our sleep?
So it is, but not the way most people think. So most people will be like, oh, Michael, it's the blue light that's killing us all and we can't do melatonin. I got news for you. Your eyes are pretty smart, and so is your brain. And it kind of knows when you've had overexposure and when you haven't. What's more interesting to me from these devices is the engagement. If you're trying to get your high score on Candy Crush, there's no universe you're trying to go to bed, right? If you're stalking your Facebook friends, you're not trying to fall asleep. You need runway to land the plane. Okay, like I tell this to everybody. Like this is how it works. It's not an on-off switch. It's more like slowly pulling your foot off the gas and slowly putting your foot on the brake. Like that's how your body should be relaxing and getting into sleep. And if you've got your device out in front of you, I just don't think that's happening. Now, I will tell you this is a huge negotiating point with almost everybody I talk to, and I'm like, put it in the bathroom and charge it. Oh my God, what if my kids call? It could be an emergent situation. How many times has that happened? 0. Okay. And I didn't ask you to turn it off. I just asked you to put it in the other room. You can still hear it. It's amazing how attached people are to their phone. They think they're going to miss something. And the worst part is in the middle of the night, I think that's where we have even more problems, because when people grab it to see what time it is, then they check Facebook. And again, what you're doing is your energy is going up, not down, right? Your heart rate is going up, not down. Anything that you're doing in bed other than having sex, your heart rate should be going down.
Yeah, so it's not necessarily the light emitted by these devices, although that might play a small role.
Absolutely. It plays some role, but I would argue it's that engagement.
It's like the emotions
totally
that the device elicits, which are more often than not, I would say, negative emotions.
Yeah, and even if they're positive, it's still going in the wrong direction. Right? Like I tell people all the time, like, don't turn on your favorite comedy, right, as you're falling asleep, because you're just going to laugh, and your heart rate's going to go. I mean, you're going to have a great time, but you're not going to fall asleep. Watch C-SPAN.
Yeah. Seriously. Oh man. Okay. So smartphones, alcohol,
caffeine. But the biggest one I would argue is not sleeping within your chronotype. Right. So last time we were here, we talked a lot about chronotypes. And for folks out there who may or may not remember, chronotypes are these internal biological sleep schedules that our body has based on our genetics. So believe it or not, I can look on an area of your human genome called the PER3 area. And if the building blocks are flipped one way, you're an early bird. If they're flipped another way, you're a night owl. If they're in the middle, you're a person in the middle. And so what's interesting about knowing that is if you sleep within your chronotypical swim lane, what ends up happening is you get better quality sleep and you need less of it. So I think that's another factor that a lot of people kind of just don't even really think about. I would say one of the biggest problems, though, quite honestly, and we address it a lot in the book, is that a lot of people think that their sleep problem is just going to go away. They're just like, I'm stressed, I'm in midlife. Like, this is how it's supposed to be. I'll catch up on the weekends. Maybe I'll just drink a little more. Maybe I'll try my partner's Ambien, whatever. And they just think it's going to go away. I've got a news flash for you. Like, to be clear, I've been doing this for 25 years. If your sleep is not, it doesn't have to be perfect, but if your sleep is not of a reasonable quality where you wake up in the morning and you feel good, something else is probably going wrong. Like this is the window. This is the indicator. This is the engine light coming on saying, hey, something else is happening here. Because by this time you would have already probably been diagnosed with a primary sleep disorder like apnea or narcolepsy or something like that. But if even so, it's worth getting a sleep test. And by the way, since COVID, sleep tests are like 1,000,000% easier to get. We actually sell them on my website on thesleepdoctor.com. You literally push a button and you go to a calendar. You make a appointment with a teledoc, board certified in all 50 states, talk to them for 20, 30 minutes. They push a button. They send a disposable sleep lab to your home. It's a wrist-worn thing. Now we've got them just in rings, and you wear it, and then you wake up. The data ports over to your phone. 24 hours later, you're talking to the same doctor who's going through your data with you, and then you've got treatment. What used to take 7 weeks takes 72 hours.
Wow.
It's insane. So people don't have an excuse any longer for like, oh, my insurance doesn't cover it. Oh, I don't really want to go and it's going to take so long. It's $190.
Well, right? How urgent is chronic sleep disruption? Like what are some of the long-term health risks from somebody who's chronically sleep disrupted?
It's a great question. In the area that you happen to tread in, obesity is a big one. In my second book, The Sleep Doctor's Diet, we reviewed how sleep deprivation affects metabolism. So it's actually pretty interesting. So when you look at metabolic rate from somebody who's sleep deprived, your metabolism actually slows down. In order to conserve resources in the system, right? So you've been up for 24, 36 hours and your body's like, oh, slow down. I don't want to use everything up. And then hunger kicks in, right? Because it's like, go get me some more resources, right? So then, you've got high hunger and, high appetite, because that's different than hunger, and you've got low metabolism. And then these two hormones called leptin and ghrelin kick in, and they really mess things up. So when you're sleep deprived, you have, less leptin. Leptin is the satiety hormone, feeling full, and more ghrelin, which I remember as the go hormone, makes me want to eat. You have 20% more of that. So just to go over it again, you have high appetite, you have high hunger from the ghrelin, you have low feelings of fullness, and you have a low metabolism. And this is all from roughly 18 to 20 hours of sleep deprivation. It gets worse and worse as the sleep deprivation gets worse and worse. And then you start to crave high fat, high caloric foods because you've got so much cortisol floating around in your head right now. And you're like, this sucks. And so what's the easiest way to fix that? Eat a muffin, grab a Snickers, right? Serotonin on the draw, and that quiets it down. And now you're overeating. Right? So sleep deprivation, I would say, affects metabolism and food consumption in at least 4 different ways.
Wow. It also increases risk for metabolic dysfunction.
Oh my gosh. We haven't even talked about that. I mean, if we want to go to the other side of medicine, holy shit. Like sleep deprivation, let me back up. So in my practice, when we have somebody who's got hypertension or high blood pressure and we can't control it with medication, this is called, non-reactive hypertension. As soon as we treat their sleep apnea, which 90% of them have, everything gets better under control. Right? And so what's interesting is these sleep disorders, they're sometimes fueling the bigger disorder. And if we treat the sleep disorder, sometimes the other stuff gets better, which is kind of miraculous.
And also there's a connection between chronic sleep disruption and possible risk for increased risk for Alzheimer's disease?
Oh, yes, absolutely. Oh, that's a great question. So let's talk about that, since this is a new area of interest for you as well. So one of the things that we know is in stage 3-4 sleep, that if this was discovered, I believe it was a Nobel Prize winner, that there's this thing called the glymphatic system in the brain. So the glymphatic system, for all of our listeners out there, it's kind of like the waste management system of the brain. It's like the garbage truck of the brain. So when you're thinking, like we're having a conversation and thinking, our brain is actually creating these proteins every time we have these thoughts. And these proteins mount up, and it kind of gets congested in there. And these proteins are called beta amyloid and tau. So they're very important. And what's interesting is when beta amyloid and tau get to a really big amount in your brain, they just kind of hug the nerves and they end up actually strangling them. And that's called Alzheimer's disease. Right? And so if you don't have enough stage 3-4 where the waste management system comes in and gets that stuff out of there, you're going to get Alzheimer's disease, right? So now let's get back to your original question, which was things that disrupt my sleep, right? What alcohol disrupts stage 3-4 sleep, where this glymphatic system is more than any other stage. Wow. It makes you fall asleep, but you get really crappy sleep, right? So when we start to think about this from an Alzheimer's perspective, and people are negotiating whether or not they can have red or white wine with me, and I'm like, come on, like this isn't where you want to be thinking. And so I would argue for sure that we want to have as high a quality sleep as we can, because it's brain preservation, dude. Like this is what our brains need, because that's when they get cleaned out. That's when all the repairs happen. It's during sleep recovery.
Yeah. Now, one night of bad sleep, that's not really
that's fine.
A big deal, but it's like we're talking about chronically poor sleep.
Yeah. I kind of look at it like this. With a lot of my patients, they're not great sleepers, right? Obviously, they're showing up at my doorstep. Once we get them to become decent sleepers, then what I explain to them is, if you're a decent sleeper, well, let's say you're getting on average 6.5 to almost 7 hours a night. When you have a 4-hour night, it doesn't total you. You can snap back and get into your system again. But if you're sleeping 4 hours and 5 hours and 7 hours, and then you have a bad night, you're done. Right? So your body doesn't snap back as quickly. So everything is about consistency when it comes to sleep. Actually, when it comes to drinking and breathing, it also is about consistency. Like, how much water are you getting during the day? When are you getting your water during the day? And there's a big relationship, by the way, between hydration and sleep, which is you ain't sleeping if you ain't hydrated. Like, it's a real problem because your body needs the fluid to make things happen.
How many hours before sleep should we curtail our fluid consumption?
This is a great question. So I was on the Today Show not that long ago, and I gave this kind of fun rule that I call the 3-2-1 rule. So 3 hours before lights out, stop alcohol. 2 hours before lights out, stop food. And 1 hour before lights out, stop fluids, assuming your doctor tells you you can, and this doesn't include medications, blah, blah, blah. And when we were at that conference, at that Eudaimonia conference, I saw this guy, Brian Johnson, on stage, right? And he's this crazy biohacker dude, and he does all this testing to himself. One of the things he said, he stops eating at 11 a.m.
That's crazy to me.
Goes to bed at like 9 o'clock at night. And he says that was the single biggest factor in the quality of his sleep. Now, I'm going to be honest with you. I'm eating until I want to eat, but it's an interesting idea set that I hadn't really thought about, because most people have food and then there's some period of time where hopefully they don't. And so the question becomes, does the digestive process deplete the quality of your sleep, or does it change the quality of your sleep? And I think it probably does. So I would tell people, if you can, and I'm the worst at this because nighttime snacking is my biggest problem, is if you can really not have any food intake for 2, maybe 3 hours before bed, you're going to sleep so much better from a quality perspective, for sure.
If you do choose to eat, relatively close to bedtime, as many of us do, myself included, are there any specific foods or even macronutrients to avoid?
So, to avoid.
Or to prioritize?
Yeah, well, so here's what's interesting is carbs help sleep. And so, I don't want to tell people have a milkshake because that's probably not the right idea because of the sugar and the dairy. But protein shakes, I think, are perfectly fine as long as it's got some level of carbohydrate in it. You want to be kind of careful and not load up on protein right before bed. It's a little bit more difficult to digest, and so your body doesn't necessarily know what to do with it. But if you have to eat late, I would say eat light. If you know you're normally not eating until 8 or 9 o'clock at night, really make lunch your biggest meal of the day if you can, and then keep to the lighter side of things. Also, it's going to be tough if you eat a steak at 11 and then go to bed at midnight. I'm just telling you, it's not going to go well.
Yeah, especially if you get the meat sweats,
right?
Which can happen. A lot of bodybuilders do drink protein. I mean, there's data that suggests for optimizing muscle protein synthesis that consuming protein, right before bed can actually help, because you're spending so many hours.
For sure, but they also have a very different protein regimen than normal humans, right? Because they're trying to do by the way, I have no idea how somebody I'm 155 pounds. I could not eat 155 grams of protein in a day. I would puke. It would be tough for me. And these bodybuilders, they're going well past that. Also, I wonder, because I was looking this up the other day, your body can't absorb more than about 20 grams of protein in one instance. So when you think about it, what are they doing?
Well, I think it depends on the meal. I think it depends, if the meal is a mixed meal that has fats and other.
Absolutely, we can probably get more protein digested because you get the fires burning.
Yeah,
right.
I think that 20-gram rule typically applies to a whey protein that's just so rapidly absorbed that there's no slowing of the absorption of those amino acids. Whereas a mixed meal, like you can consume probably 80 grams of protein from a steak, and I mean it just takes that. A meal like that would take hours to digest.
And if you had alcohol on top of it, it would make it even slower.
Interesting.
So I just learned this the other day because somebody was asking me, well, what exactly happens when you pass out, right? Because they wanted to know. And I was like, that's actually a really good question. I was teaching a class at USC, so it was a student that was interested. And so we were talking about it, and we looked at digestion of the alcohol itself. And that's what's so interesting is normally it takes the average human approximately an hour to digest one alcoholic beverage. But once you're asleep, it takes almost 3 for the same beverage. Wow. So everything slows down. So I just think it's important to be thoughtful about what you're eating before bed. Also, I would argue that those bodybuilders, probably their metabolic rate and what their system is used to getting is probably very different than the average of us out there.
Yeah, and it also probably depends on goals. I mean, if you're a competitive bodybuilder, you'll make some concessions, some sacrifices.
Of course.
In the name of, eking out a little bit more hypertrophy.
For sure.
For sure. But as you've I think totally rightfully suggested, for mere mortals. even those who are looking to optimize muscle growth and maintenance, it's ultimately the amount of protein that you get over the span of 24 hours that matters most.
Agreed.
How do we stop snoring? I'm not a snorer,
Great
but
question.
if somebody snores, how do
you
they
sure?
stop that? I actually am sure,
Okay,
because
good.
I use an app sometimes to wake up
good.
called Sleep Cycle, I think it's called.
Yeah.
Which
I've
has a
seen Sleep Cycle.
microphone. Yeah.
Yeah. You put it right by your bed and it listens to you and it tells you when you're awake, when you're sleeping.
Yes, I'm happy to report I don't snore.
Good. Well, okay. So number one, Sleep Cycle, unfortunately, it's a great app, but it's not like particularly accurate. Like it's not a tracker. It gives you some good ideas. When you think about snoring, this is a huge complaint. I've saved more marriages as a sleep doctor than I ever would have as a marital therapist just by getting snoring out of the bedroom or fixing it. So, few things to think about. Number one, I tell everyone you want to decongest for better rest. Okay, so what do I mean by that? So your nose is this hose. So you ever been out in the garden and you stick your thumb over the end of the hose and the water squirts faster, right? So what you've done is you've closed the aperture of the hole, which means the amount of material that has to come out has to sneak through a smaller, so it has to go faster and get out of there. That's the basic physics of it all. Okay, now your nose is said hose. Anywhere that congestion comes in and makes the nose more narrow, makes the air move faster. You've got a lot of flappy tissue from your nose all the way down, and so that causes the vibration, which causes a cadence, which causes the snore. So the only way to make snoring go away is to open up the pipes, right? So how do we do that? A whole host of different ways. One of the first things I tell people to do is if you want to see if it's snoring versus sleep apnea, in most cases, what you can actually do is take a shot of Afrin in each nostril before you go to bed. Don't use Afrin for more than 2 days because your nasal tissue will get addicted to it and you'll be a big mess. But then ask your partner to listen to see if you stop breathing in your sleep. The biggest problem we've got with snoring is a lot of people don't realize it, but they end up having actually a mild to moderate case of sleep apnea. And that turns out to be very detrimental, long-term cardiovascular disease, all these kind of obesity, all these kinds of problems. But let's say that's not your gig, right? You've done a sleep test, you just snore. What are you going to do? So number one, I ask people to just irrigate with saline. So neti pot, a Navage, whatever it is you want to do. If you can do that and get away with it, awesome. If you can, stay away from Benadryl. Stay away from those over-the-counters. Believe it or not, there's actually data to now suggest that if you're taking Benadryl every single night, it is a direct path to Alzheimer's. So by taking those anticholinergic medications on a very regular basis, we know that that causes a level of confusion that is significant.
I've seen that, yeah.
Yeah, it's kind of scary data. And that, by the way, that's the PM in all the PMs out there, like the Tylenol PM and the Advil PM. Almost all of it is Benadryl.
Yeah.
And so when people are telling me like, Michael, I'm taking this thing every night, I'm like, hold on a second. Like, let's figure this out. This is not where you want to be.
I also find that by...
Oh, wait, I didn't finish snoring. Let me finish snoring.
Yeah.
And so another thing that's important is to move everything around. And so as an example, the elbow roll to the side works because what's happening is when you roll to the side, your tongue is moving forward and that's opening up your posterior airway space and allowing you not to snore. Also, by the way, lose a little weight. That works really, really well. About 5% body fat loss or body weight loss seems to work pretty well. So in a 200-pound person, we're talking about 5 pounds, right? It's not a lot, but we'll start to lower the decibel level of the snore itself. Sound is a matter wave. And so the other big thing that I tell people to do is if you're lying next to somebody, put a pillow in between, like a pillow wall. Here's what happens. If I'm snoring at the pillow wall, it's going to bounce back at me, and then I'm going to turn over to the other side. And if you can get the person to snore away from you, that's half the battle right there. Again, decongesting is going to be super duper helpful. And I don't mind internal or external nasal dilators. So breathe right strips on the outside. My favorite, though, is called Mute, and it's an internal nasal dilator. 30 seconds after you put it in, you don't feel it. I use it when I work out and I get a much better workout.
I need to try that.
It's cool.
Wow.
Mute snoring.
Mute snoring. I find it really helpful to gauge to what degree your nasal anatomy is impacting your airflow by just taking your fingers and putting them on the side of your nose.
That's all it takes.
On both sides of your nose and then just spreading apart.
And you can feel it. You can actually, so that's what this Mute does is I put one in Dr. Oz one day and he was like, oh my God, like it's like this breath of fresh air. It's just like when you do this and you're literally opening the pipes. That's what you need to do in terms of snoring.
And you prefer those to breathe right strips?
I do because every time I do breathe right strips, like I have slightly oily skin and those things migrate and then half the time it's like across my eyeball. I wake up in the morning like something crazy is going on.
Is there a way to holistically treat sleep apnea without having to use a CPAP?
Oh yeah, absolutely. Well, weight loss would definitely be helpful. Also, there are now mandibular advancement devices. So there are mouth guards that move your lower jaw forward, which opens up your posterior airway space. Those can be super duper effective. And there's now something that's really interesting and new. It's called Excite OSA. And it's this really interesting thing where it's like a TENS unit for your tongue, and it shrinks your tongue, which provides more space. Doesn't change taste, it doesn't change voice, doesn't change anything. And it works like a CPAP. I've actually taken people off of CPAP and put them on this thing.
What's it called again?
It's called Excite OSA. They use it for 20 minutes during the day. No mask, no hose, no headgear at night. It's pretty impressive. We talk about it in the book.
That's so cool.
Yeah. I mean, there's some pretty cool technologies that are definitely coming out with sleep. From a holistic standpoint, the other options people could do is they could, raise the head of their bed, right? Or use a wedge, because if you can take gravity out of the equation and you lean kind of forward, then your anatomy is moving forward, and that could be helpful. But I tell people all the time, like, I get it. Nobody wants to sleep with a mask on their face, but there are a lot of options that are out there, and there are much better masks now than there ever were before.
Well, correct me if I'm wrong, but there are a few types of sleep apnea. One is, structural if you're very overweight, for example. But
Correct.
then there are other forms that are more central.
Yeah, exactly. So there's obstructive and central. And so central is where your brain tells your lungs don't breathe. That's serious. That's a really tough one. I've had a few of those cases in my career. We had one. This guy was a school bus driver. Okay. And what would happen is he was so sleepy. And back in the day, they had this thing where you had to take this arm and you would crank it and it would open up the school bus doors. So he would crank it and fall asleep. And then the kids would come on, and then the last kid would come on and hit him in the head, and he'd wake up and he would click it back, and then he would go to the next stop. Right. So some parents figured this out, and they're like, no. This is a bad idea. We're going to get you tested. And so it turned out he had terrible central sleep apnea. He had the worst case I'd ever seen in my career. So we sent him to neurology, because that's like, there's something going on with his brain. So he ended up having this thing called curare malformation, where half of his brain formed outside the foramen magnum, like outside of his skull, and it was pinching on the respiratory centers. So they broke the bottom of his skull, created a shelf, and scooped his brain back up. Apnea gone.
Wow.
It was crazy.
Our mutual friend, Jim Quick.
Yes.
He suffered from sleep apnea for a long time.
Yeah, I fixed it.
You fixed it.
I did.
He had some kind of,
a surgery.
I think he's been public about this.
Oh yeah, he's been my patient for years. He talks about me all the time. Yeah. When Jim first came to me, he was sleeping 90 minutes.
Wow.
A night. Now we've got him at 4.5, 5 hours easily, and sometimes even more. He was a very interesting case. He had obstructive sleep apnea. He actually did the surgery. It was a bit of a recovery for him. So it was a little bit different than some of the things we've been discussing, but he's done significantly better ever since then. But yeah, Jim's a dear friend.
Yeah, no, he's the man. What role does exercise play in sleep?
So I would argue that the best way to get high quality sleep is daily exercise. You don't have to run a marathon, okay? It's just about moving and being active, I think, becomes important. There's a lot of data to suggest that you kind of have to do something with your body for your body to have to rest, right? And so when I deal with a lot of older people who are very sedentary and they're like, oh, I can't sleep for more than 3 or 4 hours, sometimes in my mind I'm thinking, well, honey, you haven't done anything all day. Like, of course your body doesn't need to sleep. Like, you need to get up and move. So I think exercise becomes more and more important the older that we get, especially for sleep in general. Also, from a hydration standpoint, exercise, hydration is very important. A lot of people don't even think about it, but you want to overhydrate on the days that you're exercising, but you probably don't want to go too crazy. In the book, we talk about these things called hydration multipliers, like Liquid IV and LMNT and things like that. I like all of them, but people need to look at the sodium content, because some of them got over 1,000 milligrams of sodium, which is a lot. And I would say those are good to use on special occasions. So like, I'm a runner, and if I'm running during the week, I probably wouldn't have it. But if I do a long run on Saturday, I would use it then, right? Or if I'm going to go do a 2.5 hour hike, or a mountain bike with some friends, I would use it then. So in instances where it's above and beyond what your kind of normal exercise routine is, I think that's when hydration multipliers can be effective. But if you use them every day, you're going to load up with sodium, and then you're going to have a bigger problem on your hands.
Now, is sleep, is exercise and activity, the fact that it can encourage, nighttime sleepiness, is that what's referred to as sleep pressure?
A little bit, yeah. And so there's a couple of different ways you can think about sleep pressure. So sleep pressure is kind of this idea of sleep deprivation starts to build up over time, and that creates this idea set of the brain wants to go to sleep. And so, yeah, there's definitely, I would argue that probably would work.
What impact does THC and CBD have in sleep? Because I use like low dose THC occasionally.
Yeah, I'm a huge cannabis fan. I'm pro cannabis in all these areas. To be honest with you, I think I've actually written more as a sleep specialist than almost anybody in the country on this. So you definitely hit the jackpot when you're talking to me about cannabis and sleep. And I think it's important for folks to think about it. So as an example, we're here in California where cannabis is recreationally legal, so it's easy for us to talk about it. There are some places where it's not. And so I want people to understand we are not proponents of doing anything illegal. We are just talking about it from a medicinal kind of standpoint here, which I think is important for people to recognize. So I go into these dispensaries all the time and I ask them all these questions, right? Because I'm the pain in the ass that walks through the door, right? And so what I've discovered is there's only 3 reasons why people go into a dispensary: recreation, pain, sleep. That's it. Those are the only reasons that people seem to be in there. And most of the sleep products in there are not really sleep products. They're just add-on products. It's like, this brand has put out this monster, THC. Oh, and there's a little sleep product on the side. Very few, if any, are companies that are born of sleep-related THC products. So I don't think there's a lot in the marketplace that's very good right now, just to be fair. However, I think there's a lot that people could do that could be beneficial. So number one, let's talk about CBD versus CBN. Okay, so a lot of people have heard all about CBD. As soon as cannabis started becoming legal, it was freaking everywhere. There is absolutely, positively no data that I'm aware of that CBD makes you sleepy. However, CBD does help lower anxiety and help with pain. So if pain is keeping you awake or anxiety is keeping you awake, CBD may work really, really well for you. But to be clear, it doesn't make you sleepy. It's attacking those 2 other areas. CBN, as in nighttime, makes you sleepy. The reason is CBN is oxidized THC. Okay, so not that you ever did this, but maybe somebody was in high school and they went and they bought a bag of weed and they put it into their closet and they forgot about it and they came back and it was brown. We used to call it dirt weed, right? And when you smoked it, everybody went to sleep, right? That's CBN. It's oxidized THC. It doesn't have that oomph. It doesn't have that, I'm going to get you high to the recreational level. It's just a little bit of a hump over that anxiety and then makes you start to feel sleepy. I saw one study about 3 weeks ago, which exclusively looked at CBD versus CBN. And what they discovered was CBN is actually good for nighttime awakening. So remember how we were talking earlier in the show about what do you do in the middle of the night? CBN in the beginning of the night may actually help that out if you are a cannabis pro person. So that's one of the constituents that I like. I'm also going to be very honest with you. I like THC. I don't think there's anything wrong with it, but there's a very big difference between getting stoned and using THC medicinally to get to sleep. And so the goal here is not to get buzzed or feel the high. The goal is to get just enough in to physiologically lower that arousal threshold, because THC lowers REM sleep and increases heart rate. And remember, we want our heart rate to go down, not up. So when somebody goes and they get a very high potency vape, let's say, and they hit it right before bed, that's probably not going to be helpful for you. Also, I'm not the biggest vape fan when it comes, as a doctor, we're not really thrilled with the idea of vapes. I like the tinctures, so I like the liquids, and you can do them sublingual, so you can stick them under your tongue, and it goes up and in about 20 minutes. So that makes it work nicely there. But I've got patients who they've got their vape in the middle of the night and it's a CBN mixture. And they wake up, they take one hit, they roll over and they go back to sleep and they're fine. Now, am I advocating for that? I'm not advocating for that, but at the end of the day, I can see the utility and I can see the use case. And we're all starting to learn more about how do we medicinally understand and what is the place for cannabis. So while I can't say that I love the idea, I can say that I like the fact that my patients can get back to sleep sometimes.
Yeah, I use a product it's a gummy from a brand which I have no affiliation with, called Wild, I believe is the name. It's WILDE. I could be wrong.
I like the
Or
Wana.
WYLD, I think is how it's spelled. And it's a gummy, and I divide it into 4s, and I'm getting about 2.5 milligrams of THC. And I know that there's a version of it that also contains CBN and CBD.
Yeah.
Both.
And so I would say it's probably worth taking a look at the other version with those 2 other constituents in it, cutting it up again, and seeing what the difference is, right? Like run an experiment on yourself and kind of see how you do. At the end of the day, I try to explain to people, I don't think there's anything wrong with using cannabis as a sleep aid, but you should still be able to go to sleep without it.
Yeah.
right? Like you should be able to, like, I get it if it's you've got a lot of worries on your mind or it's been a super stressful day or whatever, but you need to be able to give yourself what's called a T break, a THC break for significant periods of time, because otherwise it's going to become less and less effective. Now you're smoking full joints before bed. It's probably not going well, you know, so you want to be, again, thoughtful and medicinal in how it's used. But I think there's definitely a use case for it, and I'm a fan.
So dose really, you know, makes a huge difference. You want to essentially microdose.
Exactly. That's a great way of thinking. I hadn't thought about it that way, but I like the way you're thinking. I think you would want to microdose cannabis in order to help you fall asleep. I don't have any problems with that.
Is there a rationale to picking, you know, either, because I know you typically see two strains of THC, indica sativa,
versus sativa. So here's the bottom line. Everything's a hybrid now. Good luck finding a pure indica, because I don't think it's out there. I think that we're starting to see more and more technology get into the cannabis space. And so I think it's going to be beneficial, because I think we're going to see different absorption profiles. I think we're going to start to see different form factors. So edibles are very different now than they ever used to be. You mentioned gummies. Some people, again, like vapes. Some people prefer flower. So there's a whole host of things. I think dose makes a difference. Here's what's tough about something like flower is if you've rolled an entire joint, most people aren't going to take 2 hits and then put it away, right? Versus you have a vape, you can take 2 hits, or a gummy, you can cut it in half and just take a half. So I think sometimes the form factor can influence the amount, but you hit the nail on the head. The amount is, from my standpoint, is probably the most important factor.
Love that. For somebody who does chronically struggle with sleep-related issues, at what point should they seek the help of a doctor, such as yourself?
Yeah, it's a great question. And so I call it the rule of threes, right? So if you're having problems more than 3 times a week, for more than 3 weeks a month, for more than 3 months, talk to somebody. Like it really, like, you should be able to do this. And to be fair, I'm not convinced that everybody needs to see a sleep doctor. Like, it might just be talking with your doctor. It might be talking with a life coach. It might be talking with a friend. Just be like, hey, I want to check in with you. I think my sleep is kind of messed up. What do you think? I'm having to do this multiple times a night, or I have to take gummies 7 nights a week for me to get to sleep. You probably already know that that's not the best idea, but checking in with somebody can be helpful. The good news is that if you swing over to thesleepdoctor.com, we have a tremendous amount of information on there, so people can look up any aspect of sleep that they might want if they think they could have a sleep problem. We also can do sleep tests from there, so it can be pretty anonymous. You don't have to, like, call your doctor and say, hey, I think I have a sleep problem. Like, a lot of stuff is now available online. So I think it's more accessible now than it ever has been, but people can do it, and I think they should.
Yeah, I love it. Well, talk to us about your book. I mean, I'm so excited. I mean, this is, what number book is this for you?
Number 5.
This is number 5. Wow.
This is number 5.
Exciting. Sleep, drink.
Nonfiction. You don't have one fiction book.
I didn't know that.
Yeah, I wrote a book called The Sleeper.
So it's still sleep related.
It's still on brand.
On brand, yeah.
Right, for sure. But it's a murder mystery.
Wow.
You want it? I'll get you a copy.
Yes,
I couldn't
please.
sell any of them.
But that's so cool.
It was super fun. It's about a patient who has REM behavior disorder, and he acts out his dreams. And it turns out that he's a sleeper in a sleeper cell. Like, you know, like they have these cells where they hypnotize people, and then all of a sudden they wake up and now they're a confidant for some. It's a crazy story, but it's a lot of fun.
Wow, so fun. So who'd you write this book for?
So this book, honestly, I was in my gym. Well, there's 2 real stories behind this. I was in my gym, and I see this happen all the time. The people get off the equipment and they just look around and they have no idea what to do. They're just like, I don't know what I'm supposed to do next. And it's like, there's no roadmap to wellness, right? Nobody really kind of knows where the starting line is. And so that was part of the reason, like, that person is the person who I want to read this book. Also, I was reading, Joe Polish has a book called Life Gives to the Giver. You know Joe, right?
I think I've met him.
Great book, Life Gives to the Giver. And he talks about a life of service and giving to people. And in one of the sections of the book, he mentions this idea called dominoes. And it's like, when you learn how to do a certain skill, it opens up other doors. Like, it's a domino effect. And it's like crawling is to walking is to running, right? And so I'm like, okay, what are the dominoes of wellness? Because everybody's confused. And I started thinking about it. And finally I was like, okay, what are the 3 things? I like threes. What are the 3 things that you have to do every single day, whether you want to do it or not? You got to breathe. So that's 1. You got to drink water. So that's 2. And you pretty much have to sleep. I mean, the world's record is 11 days, but the guy was hallucinating by like day 6. So it's like a bad idea. So I said, if I could teach people what they're doing wrong with those 3 things, which by the way, almost nobody thinks they're doing anything wrong. Like everybody's like, why did you write a book about breathing, Michael? I'm like, oh, by the way, because there are all these really cool methods of breath work that if you do them, you can change your entire body. You can change like your mindset. You can change all these cool things about yourself. That's why I wrote the book, right? But people don't know. And so I was like, well, what about hydration? I mean, this is one of the most basic things that so many people come to me and they're like, how do I know if I'm hydrated? Look at the color of your pee. That'll give you a really good indicator. Like we have a color chart in the book, it's stuff like that. So I really wrote it for the person who just doesn't know where to start, because I felt like I was in that category for a long time. It's intimidating as hell trying to jump into the wellness spot. Like, do I drink a green drink? Do I do a cold plunge? Do I do sauna? How much? How long? I'm 56 years old. Is it going to hurt? Is it going to help? Like, I don't know any of this stuff. I know for a fact, if I sleep, if I hydrate, and if I breathe, it's going to be good for me. So all I want to do is teach people how to do that well. And sometimes it's these itty bitty tweaks that people don't realize. Like I'll give you a great one for hydration. Sip, don't gulp, right? I can't tell you the number of times people have told me that. I never understood it until I really started to think about it. When you wake up in the morning, it's like your body is like a sponge, right? But not a good sponge, like the sponge that you see on the sink in the morning that's hard as a rock that you can like nail things with, right? That's you, right? Your body's almost completely dehydrated. You lose almost a full liter of water just from the humidity in your breath, right? So you're not in a good spot. Okay, so what do people do? And they try to hit it. What happens when you take that hard as a rock sponge and you open up the faucet all the way? It hits it and the water just runs off. It doesn't get absorbed. But if you temper it and you just do a few drops, it absorbs, and now you have a tool that you can utilize. Your body is the sponge. Sip, don't gulp. I promise you it will make, and by the way, you'll have to drink less water.
Yeah, I learned this from you the last time you were here, that sleep is even the phrasing is a dehydrative event.
Exactly. Yeah.
Wow. What about electrolytes? A lot of people, will advocate for putting salt in your water or consuming an element.
Yep. So I like the hydration multipliers, but like I was saying, I really see them more for particular events rather than on the regular, because it's all about, so hydration is all about salt water balance. That's all your body is trying to do, is trying to say, okay, less water, less salt, more salt. And it's just trying to keep that whole balance working, which by the way, isn't so easy depending upon what you're doing, like exercising where you sweat a lot or things like that. So a lot of people don't know how much water to drink. We actually developed a water formula for people in the book. And so you just take your weight in pounds and you multiply it by 0.6, and that's it. That's all you need to do. If you are exercising, add 12 ounces for every 30 minutes. That's as complicated as it gets. You'd be shocked. People just don't even think about it. The biggest problem I see with water and sleep is people forget, and then it's 9 o'clock at night, and then they try to chug as much water as they can, and then they're peeing all night long.
And what are the potential effects of being dehydrated?
On sleep?
Yeah, on sleep or just more broadly on health.
Oh gosh, well, I mean, it's awful. So, I mean, your body is like almost all water. And so when you dehydrate, you actually shrink. In fact, your brain tissue shrinks. That's why people get migraine headaches, is because their brain is actually shrinking around the neurons because there's not enough water in there, right? And so your whole body stops functioning well. I mean, I think if you go like 2.5 to 3 days without water, like I think you're done.
Yeah, that's it.
Yeah.
Lights out.
Right. So like it really is vital for everything in every cell. I mean, if you think about it, it really does make up so much. So everything in your body has to have water to just get things moving and circulating.
And I love the formula too, because there is a risk to overhydrating
yeah,
as well,
absolutely. Right? You can become what's called polydipsic. So you can drink too much water and you can become completely inebriated. You can actually get drunk on water. This happens on occasion, like with fraternities where there's hazing and they're like, okay, everybody drink 3 gallons of water. And they think it's funny, and they don't understand what the consequences are. And so if you overhydrate, now you're in almost as bad a state if you're underhydrated. Like we have to tap you, like we have to get that stuff out of you fast because your body doesn't know it can't process all of that quickly. So you can definitely overhydrate for sure.
Wow.
Keep a balance.
Yeah. Well, I love all the information that you provided in your book, as well as to us on the show
of course. Today.
So thank you. Yeah, you're just like a wealth of knowledge. I love it. One last question for you, but before we get to that, where can people pick up your new book, and where can they find you on social media?
Yeah, so my new book, if you swing over to the website, thesleepdoctor.com/book, there's all kinds of pre-order fun stuff for people. We've got a $100 course that actually can get involved in a raffle for a free mattress. Believe it or not, we're giving away beds to sell books. Hopefully it works.
Love that.
We're having a lot of fun with it. People can go there, or you can just ring me up on Amazon, Sleep, Drink, Breathe. We're right there, and we'd love to get you to check it out and learn something.
Hell yeah. What does living a genius life mean to you?
You know, I think living a genius life to me has a lot to do with lowering my stress. I think that's really, when my stress is low, I think that's really when I'm in flow, right? And I think that's when I can have my genius life. And so what that means to me is being able to, I guess, sleep, hydrate, eat, like put my body in that place where I know it can have the greatest impact, not just for me, but I feel like I'm doing a good job of helping out the world. So I think that's really where my genius life lies.
Amen. I love that. Well, thanks, Dr. Breus, for coming in. As always, great to see you.
It's always a good pleasure to be here, Max. I always have a great time. You got to start calling me Michael.
Michael. Of course. But
Sleep, Drink, Breathe. Go buy it.
It's the shit.
It is the shizzle.
It is. Yeah. super pumped. Well, dope, dude. We'll have to get you back in for this is your second time, right? So around three.
I know.
Hey, if you liked that video, you need to check out this one here, and I'll see you there.